So I was doing a little bit of research. In my research, just like maybe most people, involves the Google. And so I just Google research, right? I Google what I want to research, and I just bank on it telling me the truth. So what I'm about to share with you, I actually didn't cross-check. Like, I didn't reference. I found it. I was looking for this thing. I typed in this question. This is the answer it gave me. I didn't think to, go ask anybody else. And it just dawned on me when I sat here. Like, when I looked at it, I was like, man, what I'm about to tell you is nuts. And if it's not true, so maybe you can Google while we're doing this, you can affirm, hey, this is the truth. So I'm going to say it like it's the truth, and then you can check me later. Okay, cool, deal. We're on the same page. Fantastic. There's a synthetic chemical. This is absolutely 100% true as far as the one article I read in Google. There's a synthetic chemical called denatonium. Denatonium, right? Supposedly it is the most bitter tasting substance on the planet. That's what this article said. Denatonium, the most bitter tasting substance on the planet. It's also known as, if you want to see if it has an alias, there's an alias called Bitrex, B-I-T-R-E-X, Bitrex. I didn't even check to see if that's how you pronounce it, but that's what I'm going with. Bitrex. It's often added to poisonous substances or toxic substances like antifreeze, household cleaners, paints, nail polish, rat poison, to prevent you from accidentally swallowing those things. And so the whole idea is that it's so bitter that even when you dilute this chemical down to 10 parts per million, people still instantly spit it out. I see a bunch of you looking at your phones. Does anyone confirm this? Okay, just kidding. You're just Facebooking. It's fine. We'll get to the good part in a second. What's that? Oh, you're taking notes. Yeah, sure you are. Good story. Akid. Bitter, right? This bitterness, that's what they created. This bitterness thing they put in these poisonous substances so that hopefully as soon as it touches your mouth, it's this instant reflex. I can't have that in my mouth. That's what they're going for with this thing. Isn't it interesting that when bitterness comes in through a mouth, we get it out. But when bitterness starts on the inside, we like to keep it on the inside. We continue in our series this morning, the most controversial 7-letter word in history. When God uses the F word. Today, you could probably label this message also known as a cure for bitterness. You'll see why it's the most controversial 7-letter word in history in just a moment. Today is a tough one. Last week, we talked about the idea that God would forgive you. In case you're trying to figure out what the F word is forgive. Y'all are still saying like F. That's a lot of U's is what you're thinking. No, that's wrong. Y'all shouldn't be thinking that. Sinful people. I was thinking it too. Last week we talked about that God would forgive you no matter what. Like no matter what had happened and accumulated in your life, no matter the pain you caused someone else, no matter however you had wrecked your life or maybe wrecked your kid's life or your family's life, that even at the end of the day when you were just completely reckless, that God would say, hey, you know what? I can overlook all of those things because I have this thing called grace. Now, I didn't say that, hey, it fixes your life or it makes all those things that you've broken perfect again or that it brings it back together. There's still consequences that we've got to walk through when we break things in this world. God's forgiveness is not super glue for the things we've broken. It's super glue for the heart that breaks inside of us. But He would forgive you. No matter how much guilt or shame has piled on you or sitting in you or resting in you, God would forgive you. And we find that to be controversial because there are people that have hurt us that we think they do not deserve forgiveness. They do deserve maybe the other word we were thinking of. In fact, we think of all kinds of things that we would rather them experience than for them to experience the grace of God. When we wake up in the morning and someone has ripped our heart out or they've destroyed what we have, we don't instantly think, man, I hope they experience the forgiveness of Jesus today. And that's where the controversy begins. Because God thinks they should. how far he's come. To say that he loves them, that he loves you. He would forgive you. And that leads us to this week. I know wholeheartedly that God will forgive you. But I also know wholeheartedly that he wants you to forgive others. And this bitterness thing that happens inside of us is the result of us not following through on forgive. What we need to discover is who and when and how do we pull this off? Who, when, and how do we pull this off? I will start with this phrase, and you should probably remember this one. It's not going to be on the screen. It's just you got to remember it. Forgiveness is always, capital always, about what we get. Forgiveness is always about what we get. I'll show you why. We're going to start in the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 21 through 22. You can read along on the screen with me if you like. It says this, then Peter came to Jesus. Peter was just a really good friend of Jesus, a follower of Jesus. He came to Jesus and said, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Right? That's where we're starting. And so Peter comes, and so Peter is not actually specifically talking about his siblings. Right? He's like, hey, how many times I start forgiving my brother or my sister? It's not the siblings he's talking about. He's just talking about, in general, these brothers and sisters that he has in his community, how many times should he be expected to forgive them? And so Jesus gives him an answer. It's a big number. Peter's thinking, oh, you know what? There's this expectation, just a few times, right? In fact, there's even a specific law that goes with it, and it's just single digits, right? It's not a bunch, but there's a number they've put on it. And so Peter's thinking, well, I'm going to up that a little bit. Maybe I'll just say 7 times. Should I forgive him 7 times? Let me go above and beyond what's kind of normally expected. And Jesus says, no, how about we just blow this thing out of the water and say, no, not 7 times, but 77 times. And I'm just thinking, man, I'm glad I didn't ask the question because I'm going to stick with the old rule, right? I'm glad I'm not Peter. You know, Jesus knew our reaction. He knew Peter. And so he tells us a story. Tells Peter a story that we get to read on this back end because he knew where our minds would go. He knew that immediately, even if we were struggling with putting a numerical value bigger than the numerical value we originated with, even if we struggled with that, he knew that eventually we would probably find a way to justify, well, I've done my 70 times 7 or my 77 times. And so he tells a story to explain it just a bit better. So we'll read that together. Verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I'll pay you back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. And so I'm thinking at this point, cool story, bro. That's awesome. I'm the king. So when somebody owes me a whole bunch of money, right, in terms of sin debt, right, in terms of they've wronged me and they're asking for forgiveness, I get what Jesus is saying. You got to be the big man here. You got to be the king. You got to sit on the throne. When they come to you and say, oh, I got this huge debt, and you're like, I don't deserve to forgive you, but I'll forgive you. That's right. I should be the king. But here's the problem. The story's not finished. And I think most of us go to the place and say, okay, I've got to be like the king. Actually, we're the servant. He continues his story. He says, but when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, flashback, be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged. They went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. He said, you wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?' In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed." We're the servant. We're not the king. Think about just a few facts. The first guy, he owed 10,000 bags of gold. That's a lot of gold. Servants don't make a bag of gold a day. Even if they did, 10,000 bags of gold, you know how long, if they even made a bag of gold a day, it's like 27 years, I believe. 27 plus some change. That's a long time. Even if they made a bag of gold a day, wish they didn't. And he goes out, and he's forgiven of that debt. And he goes out, and this fellow, this other guy, just like him, owes him 100 pieces of silver. Silver ain't like gold. 100's not like 10,000. And he's choking him by the neck. And he's looking down at him and saying, "I demand you pay me." Thankfully, somebody was watching and set this straight. Now, we're the servant. Jesus is trying to tell Peter, don't be like the servant. We are the servant, but don't be like the servant in this story. You know, the first thing we kind of take a look at with the king is that he forgave a debt he didn't have to forgive. Those 10,000 bags of gold. And so he was hoping that the lesson would be learned by the servant, that if you watch me model something, that when you're placed in the same situation, you can then model it as well for someone else. Notice that there were other servants watching how this servant interacted. And so the king said, "Hey, watch me, and I'll show you how to interact with people," hoping that he would then interact with his fellow servants in the same way that had been modeled with him from the king. We're the servant. He wanted him to learn that sometimes life is difficult. And sometimes people wrong you in ways they can never repay. But even still, he's trying to show him that forgiveness is needed. Forgiveness is required. I guess the first thing we can take away from this is we must forgive when they do not deserve it. I don't know who the they is for you, but we're going to talk about they a lot in the next few minutes. So maybe you should probably just go ahead and put in your mind that person that you just can't get past. And when I say the word they, you just picture their face. Some of you are picturing their face and you're throwing pies at it at the moment. Don't do that. We must forgive when they do not deserve it. The reason being, if we do not, there's a consequence. Jesus continues. He says, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Oh, stakes just got raised, didn't it? Like things just got serious. Like it wasn't so much just about, hey, there's some bags of money that probably should be yours that are no longer yours. And then, hey, there's these things that are these expectations that I have that I was going to regain this wealth that I lost, that I was going to be made whole even though someone had broken something in me, that I was actually going to be restored after a piece of me was taken away. And Jesus is saying, no, here's the deal. Maybe forgiveness is the way to wholeness. That maybe getting back what was taken from you or getting restored what was broken and torn apart, maybe that's not the answer that actually makes you whole. But to forgive. Did you notice where he said that you must forgive from? I'll read it to you again. "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother and sister from your lips." That's not what it says. It says from your heart. That's a big difference, isn't it? Like the difference between you forgiving them from here and forgiving them from here is a massive difference. Because here, I can probably say whatever I want to and convince someone, if I try hard enough, that I'm being sincere and honest. But at the end of the day, they'll never actually know my heart, will they? Because think about it. Some of the people you're picturing in your head, the they that we're talking about this morning, that you've got to figure out how you're going to get to this place of forgiveness, some of them probably don't even live close to you anymore. Some of them you might not have seen in years. Some of them might not even be alive. And so you're picturing them. And so what good will it do for you to forgive them with your mouth, with your words? It's almost as if Jesus is saying, you know what? The forgiveness piece isn't for them, it's for you. We want to make forgiveness about the other person. Jesus is trying to teach us something different. Remember what I said at the very beginning, that you could write this down. Forgiveness is always about what we get. Words can be deceiving. Sometimes our words can even deceive us. If we say it out loud over and over again enough, sometimes we even begin to believe our own lies. We change history. We change how things came into being. We change how things ended up the way they were. And we've just said it so many times that we've forgotten the actual truth. It died a long time ago. The day we needed to create something else so that we didn't look so eggy on our face. That scares me a bit when we read in Matthew 18:35, where it says, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." There's a if-then type statement there. I think we can make a decent argument that Jesus has a desire for us to forgive. Wouldn't you say? The question becomes, can we answer the practical questions about how does it work in our own individual lives as it relates to the they? So I say let's start with something that Paul said. Paul is another follower of Jesus. He wrote this in Ephesians 4:31 and 32. He says this, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ forgave you." So the first piece, the first practical thing is, hey, we've got to unload some things. We've got to get rid of the bitterness, the stuff that when it's put in from the outside, we immediately spit it back out because it's so bitter. But the stuff that originates and starts here, the stuff that's given birth to on the inside, the stuff that seeps out of hurt and broken feelings, that bitterness, we've got to get rid of it. We've got to figure out how do we unload that. This rage and anger. You know what I'm talking about. You've probably been there. Where when their name is said, you said, I can't even say their name. Or they've even said, don't say that name around me. That name is not mentioned in this house, right? God didn't give you those feelings. God didn't put that there and said, hey, use this. This will be great. This is going to help you. And your relationship with me, here, let me plant these seeds there. No, those grow out of us. It grew out of our sin and our discontent and our brokenness and our hurt feelings. And Paul is saying you've got to figure out a way to unload it. And he's saying he's trying to give you a switch. Instead, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ forgave you. There's a few things, and these are all super loaded, so we're going to take just a few minutes to get through them. But I believe these are all true. These aren't things we need to double check Google for. These are insights that I believe come straight from Jesus, and they're hard to hear, so we should buckle in. The first one is this. when we forgive, revenge becomes useless. How much does that suck? I mean, I'm for real. How much does that stink, you know? All of a sudden, once we've forgiven, the tool of revenge, it has nothing for us anymore. It's not something that works on a problem because our problem is gone. This feeling and emotion and this desire to figure out a way to get back, it's not there. So what's the revenge tool used for? That's hard though. It's hard because when you forgive, here's the deal, their suffering will bring you no joy. Think about that. Because sometimes when people have hurt us so bad, you're like, I just can't wait until they begin to suffer. And when they do, maybe we call some friends and like, hey, check this out, they're suffering. Obviously an indicator that forgiveness has not happened. Their failure will bring you no peace. It's like your world has been turned upside down and it's been turned over and flipped over, and you think that your world will be calm as soon as their world is turned up and flipped over and turned around and smashed and everything else. So when your worlds match, all of a sudden you think that's where we're going to find peace. No, now you're both in the same boat. Both of your worlds are flipped over and turned over and upside down. That is not where peace comes from. Not real peace. Maybe it makes you smile for a moment, but then you realize, oh, my life is still the way it is. It gave you a temporary relief until you stop daydreaming. Their hardships will bring you no satisfaction. Do you know why it will bring you no joy? It will bring you no peace. It will bring you no satisfaction. Do you know why those three things can't give you what you're looking for? Because true joy and peace find their origins in the Father, and only Jesus can satisfy. And remember, we're not the king, he is. And when he's faced with someone that owes him 10,000 bags of gold, he forgives. We call Jesus the Prince of Peace. In other words, he has authority over it. You think he's going to give something to you that he has authority over when you're acting in direct opposition to what he's called us to do? You think that's how we get peace? I think that's so tough. I'm getting pretty passionate about it this morning, not because I'm passionate for you, but because I'm passionate about this for me. These things that I've said out loud this morning, it's because these are some of my behaviors. These are things that I've struggled with in my own life. And so I've seen what it does, and I've seen how it hurts, and I've seen how it distracts, and I've seen how it festers. I use the word seen, I mean felt. And so there is a possibility that I'm just sharing with you my failures and my shortcomings, and no one else is like, no, I don't do anything like that. If so, at least I'm a little more transparent than when we began. I'll tell you this. Forgiveness will always say more about you than it will about them. You say, well, whoa, why? Think about the story. When you heard that the king forgave the debt, the 10,000 bags of gold, immediately you didn't think, man, what a great servant. No, you're like, wow. What a gift. But I tell you, there's a more practical reason why. It's this. To forgive requires nothing from the offender. yet requires an all-encompassing commitment from the one who's been offended. To forgive requires nothing from them who have hurt you. Yeah, they don't need to apologize. They don't need to say they're sorry. They don't even need to admit that they've done something wrong. For you to have the ability to forgive someone does not rely on them to do or say or be or feel anything. The ability to forgive rests inside of you. And remember, I told you at the beginning, forgiving is always about what we get. Because here's the deal. Real forgiveness, true, honest forgiveness is simply an extension of what we already possess as followers of Jesus. We're not offering them anything that we created on our own. We could not create grace. We didn't create mercy. We didn't even create the concept of forgiveness. But God put it in us when He put His Spirit in us. He inspired us when He said, watch me. Watch how I do this thing. Watch how I'm putting this forward. And so when we forgive, it's admission to them that we were the servant. That our 10,000 bags of gold was already ransomed. It was already paid for. It's already been taken care of. When we forgive, we're the ones saying we had a debt too. When we forgive, we're the ones saying we wronged. In fact, we wronged so much that a king had to send a son to die for a servant. That's how much we wronged. So when we forgive, it's all about what we've got. Our ability to give is so closely tied to our knowledge and understanding of how much we've been forgiven. And I fear that when we struggle to forgive, it's because we struggle to recognize how much we've been forgiven. And I think that is tough for us to swallow. Maybe now we're starting to pick up why forgive is the most controversial 7-letter word in history. Because this is not the way we want to order our world. This is not how we write things down in our book of hey, this is how we live life. No, this is contrary to what feels right inside of us. This doesn't get us excited in the morning. We don't roll out of bed and say, who can I forgive today that's wrecked my life? And honestly, I don't think Jesus did either. But then there goes that model again. It's not always what we feel like doing. It's just doing the right thing. It's being yes men and yes women for a king. Or we do wake up and say, well, I don't feel like it today, but you're still king and I'm still servant. And what do you have for me? And He puts the agenda in front of you in your open hands, and you look at it and you just say, yes, sir. Yes, God. Yes, Father. And you get to work. You see, sometimes we think that forgiving is a form of approval. We think, well, since we've forgiven them, we should hold off a little bit, because if we forgive, that means that we approve of what they had done to us. That's not true. I'll tell you this, forgiving also is not forgetting. There is nothing magic that happens when that king forgave the 10,000 bags of gold where he suddenly couldn't remember what had happened. No, the experiences that we have in our lives, we learn from them. They teach us to be better people, or sometimes they challenge us to be better individuals, to chase down what God has for us. And it's difficult, but they can be inspirational. Where we recognize that we've done the small things, maybe we can amp it up just a bit. I was speaking with just a really wise guy this morning, not in the smart aleck sense, but a really wise guy. And he asked me about the message today, and he's probably one of the smartest guys I know, and he reminded me of a story. I'm going to tell you the whole story. But ultimately, what it comes down to, it's out of the writings of C.S. Lewis, it comes down to when you begin to forgive, you probably shouldn't start with the biggest monster in your life. You should probably start with the smallest and work your way up. And each one will inspire you to take the next step. Each one will inspire you to go a bit further. Sometimes we stand in front of the largest thing in our life and we say, I just don't know how to get there. Well, that's because we're not seeing the 27 steps in front of us to get there. And there's 27 other smaller dragons that we could slay with forgiveness on our way. Some people will be able to look at the big thing, pull out your sword and say, I'm done with this. But don't be afraid if in your mind you see that face, you see those people, you see that event, and you just say, I just can't get there today. I do think you need to get there. But if you had to choose between tomorrow or the next day and never because you just wrote it off, let's take some baby steps together. Let's take some small steps and learn together to forgive. At the end of the day, forgiving is about you taking the shackles off of you. Because you can't put them in prison. You can only imprison yourself. Forgiveness is the only thing that's got the key. Unforgiveness is heavy. Some of us are walking around this room today and we've been carrying that unforgiveness where we just can't see past it. But I'm also here to tell you that there's still some hope. In addition to the need for us to forgive, in addition to all the specifics that comes with forgiving, Jesus says, I want to help you forgive. Jesus says, I want to remind you how to forgive.